Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar series, part one, key considerations when delivering apprenticeships. Just a quick note before I hand you over to our speakers, Paula, Gibson, and Bryony Kingsland. We will have a short Q&A at the end. Of the session, and you can send your questions in on the going to the questions and on your go to webinar screens. And also, please make sure you have enough bandwidth on your internet connection, as this can result in not being able to hear properly. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you straight over to Paula.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our first webinar of this spring webinar series. For those of you who are familiar with our webinar series, we do this quite a lot in support of employers. We kind of really try to pick out the key topics that are impacting on employers in relation to their apprenticeship delivery and focus in so we can start to address some of those challenges. So before we kick off, my name is Paula Gibson. I am joined by Bryony Kingsland, who is our policy lead here within City and Guilds Group. You will see City and Guilds Group now is made up of lots of different services. So, we're also part of ILM, which is our leadership and management service, and other groups there too as well. So our mission really is to help people and organisations and economies develop their skills for growth. So what we're going to talk about today is a bit of context actually as to why we're really here, I suppose, and then really delve into the key aspects when delivering apprenticeships. Some of these topics, so things around changes for recognised prior learning, undertaking initial assessment, recording, tracking the 20% off the job, and tips to be Ofsted ready. These are topics that have come out as a direct result of some employer events that we ran late last year around employer providers who were delivering their own programmes and actually wanting to help them to support for any Ofsted visits. So the great thing about this is these topics address the touch points of employers and what they're concerned about. So hopefully you're going to find this really helpful and really relevant. So just a little bit of context then, in terms of the UK position around skills. I think it's fair to say that there are far too many people with fewer skills and not enough with higher skills. We know we have continued problems with the level of English and maths within the workforce, and there continues to be a lack of basic digital skills across many sectors. And when you think of the importance of artificial intelligence coming down over the coming years, this is a significant skills gap. I think the other thing to mention is that the progress in this whole field is it has stalled over the last 10 years, meaning that the UK is actually on track to slip even further down the international league tables by 2020. However, we know the government in England has embarked on a number of whole-scale changes around apprenticeships. So we know about the levy, which was introduced a few years ago. We know about the new T levels that are coming through, and the new functional skills reforms as well. So, as I said to you, these webinars come as a result of the employer events that we ran last year and are designed to cover the key challenges that are affecting our employers today in the field of apprenticeships.
Hi everybody, it's Bryony Kingsland here, Funding and Policy Lead. Another thing that we know is happening over the course of the next couple of years are some serious reforms to the level 3, 4 and 5 qualifications that are available to deliver for employers. That's outside of apprenticeships, outside of functional skills and T levels. So you're looking at your adult learners there who may not want to take an apprenticeship or may not be relevant for apprenticeship, may not be eligible for one because of prior learning or other reasons. So we know that those reforms will be occurring over the course of the next year. So when we've got a little bit more time and a little bit more information, if employers would find it useful to have an overarching view. Sorry, everybody. Is that okay? Sorry, everybody, we've got a bit of reverb there. But if employers think it would be useful, what we can do is a policy update, which will tell you about the reforms, what they mean, and what they will mean for employers, and when we expect them to come in, so you can see what other qualifications, what other reforms are occurring that you might be able to use to upskill your workforce.
Okay, great. So just moving on then. So what I thought I'd do is just really start from the basics. So obviously we know policy is changing all the time when it comes to apprenticeships. So in terms of good practice, I've just put up some slides there to really set out what good looks like in terms of delivering an apprenticeship from the outset. So I think first and foremost, obviously the eligibility of your apprentice is absolutely key. Check they're going to be on the right programme. I had an example actually quite recently, Bryony, whereby somebody was on a team leading programme, but actually they weren't managing any staff. And the question back there was they're probably on the wrong standard. So I think what you really need to do is really sit down and check whether there's enough knowledge, new knowledge, skills and behaviours within that person's job role in order to meet the standard, because clearly that's going to impact on endpoint assessment and all of the requirements for that.
Also with that the fact that what you need to make sure is that the apprenticeship is that the work they're doing is going to give them the chance to actually really develop their skills as part of that apprenticeship. Because if you're doing a team leading apprenticeship, but you're not actually leading a team, how are you going to develop those skills and develop that knowledge that is needed as part of the on-the-job training aspect of an apprenticeship? So does the apprenticeship fit with the role that the person is taking on or about to take on or has been taking on for a few months?
Definitely. I mean, I had another example when in a previous role whereby somebody was in a finance role, but they wanted to do a project management apprenticeship, but they weren't actually project managing anything. So, it sounds really simple stuff, but it does get you tied in knots when it comes to the endpoint assessment and you cannot demonstrate that evidence. Also good practice, and this sounds very straightforward, but the induction and the sign-up process is a critical part. You will be surprised how many line managers or even apprentices don't realise that they're actually on an apprenticeship programme. So that three-way induction with the training provider, the line manager and the apprentice is really, really important. So the expectation is set out from the outset in terms of what the apprentice has to complete as part of the apprenticeship. So for example, there could be exams in there, there could be something around, the assignments, what they're expected to do as part of endpoint assessment. So that induction piece is really, really important.
We'll do a little bit more about that, the induction, sign up and initial assessment skills scan in a couple of the slides that I'm going to talk to later on. We'll go to a little bit more in detail about induction and skills scan and why it is so important, because it now links to both ESFA audits and clawback of funding if you're an employer, provider or provider, but also it links to the new Ofsted inspection, education inspection framework.
Okay. Another piece of good practice is to identify a mentor or a coach within the organisation that can support your apprentice. It could be an ex-apprentice, it could be somebody within another part of the organisation that can open doors, that can really expose your apprentice to opportunities for work-based assignments, etc. Another thing for me is really understand what's included in the endpoint assessment. For the standards that we're offering in endpoint assessment, when you register with us for endpoint assessment, you get access to the EPA preparation tools straight away. So that's a really good way of getting your apprentice and the line manager exposed to exactly what's in store for them when they go through to the gateway. So a really piece of good practice, because you don't want them to be sort of stunned at the end, really. Regular one-to-ones, 6 weekly reviews. For me, getting the apprentice signed up and inducted is one thing. Keeping them on the programme is another challenge entirely. So you have to have those touch points throughout the length of the programme. And some of these programmes, as we know, with some of these standards are quite lengthy. So they can range from 2 years up to 4 years. So having that constant support, three-way support across the period of the programme is really, really important, so they don't get left behind. And really, as an employer, I think make sure that the work-based opportunities are actually adding value to your business unit. So if there's a particular function where you want to look at how to improve a process or look at improving efficiencies, then really try to lend your apprentice the opportunity to develop a project that addresses that so they can start to report on those efficiencies. And that is pretty much a fundamental part of the new Ofsted education inspection framework, which I'll come on to later on. And then finally, enough time has to be allowed for the apprentice to prepare for endpoint assessment. So whether it's making sure they've got all their assignments in, have they done the maths and English? I mean, that should have happened sort of from the outset, from my point of view. And then things like practice. So if there's a professional discussion, this is proving to be quite challenging for some apprentices. So being able to practice with line managers, with the training provider, in order to get that professional discussion absolutely bang on.
Presentations as well seems to be another issue that I'm coming up against.
Yeah.
A lot of apprentices not being ready to present. If they have to do a presentation as part of their endpoint assessment, which some of them do, getting them giving the opportunity to practice doing a presentation and also practice putting it together, that's a really key part. So yeah,
definitely. So I just wanted to run through this as a crib sheet, really. I always find this quite an interesting flow to really test out whether or not the apprenticeship route is the right route, and have you thought of all the different implications. So if you're delivering it in-house as an employer provider, which many employers are now doing, especially in the world of team leading and management, a lot of employers are wanting to bring that in-house as an employer provider to give it their own sort of look and feel, I suppose. So the question is, do you have the right expertise to deliver that apprenticeship standard? Do your trainers have that leadership and management experience in order to deliver, or whatever the standard is? In terms of population, this isn't something that you offer out to everybody, because that would just be, not very manageable. So how are you going to target which employees within your organisation join the apprenticeship programme? Are you going to have an application process? Check the eligibility, because some of your people in the organisation may have a management qualification, or they may have enough experience in management, which means they could be ineligible. So these are really important checks and balances that you need to have within the process. I think when you're talking about apprenticeships, then don't jump to it as a quick solution. Just make sure that whatever happens as part of the apprenticeship, that it is actually addressing the skills gap that you wanting to close. So if there is a management capability issue within your organisation, will the apprenticeship resolve that, or is it something more around performance management? I think that's a really important aspect. The next slide, the next box is, is around, how can you ensure that your apprentice has a rich and positive experience? This is precisely what people like Ofsted will look for. So they place the apprentice at the heart of their inspections when they're coming in, and they really want to dig deep and understand exactly what their experience has been like. Has it been positive, and how can you evidence that? I think another really key thing is, you will be surprised how many senior managers are unaware that they have apprentices within their business. It only takes a conversation and a lift for somebody to actually find out, an SMT member to find out that, that they've got apprentices. Again, Ofsted will look for that. And I think for me, what Ofsted will want to do is to make sure that apprenticeships are embedded throughout the organisation, and senior management are bought into it and they are aware of what's happening. Again, for in-house delivery, what systems and platforms are you going to use to ensure that you're compliant? So what happens after the apprenticeship? I think, again, what inspectors will look for is, they've done their 15-month apprenticeship. Where are they now? Are they still in the business? Have they progressed? Have they got a promotion? It's not just about the apprenticeship finishing and that's it. What happens next? And they will go after ex-apprentices to see exactly how they've, what they've achieved since they've finished their programme. Again, always think about, what does success look like? Would you do this again? So if you're putting, lots of people through a customer service apprenticeship, what success do you want to really take from that? And would you go through that exercise again? I've had quite a few conversations with employers who've jumped in with customer service and really struggled to keep them on the programme because it wasn't really giving them what they wanted. So you do need to think about, what are the success measures? And that really kind of takes us to the end of this crib sheet, really, because again, it's about, what are your metrics? How are you evaluating the impact? Because we'll talk about the impact slide shortly, but I think all of these key points here will just get you to sit down and reflect on, is the apprenticeship the right way forward?
Okay, so moving on from that, and sort of expanding out on some of Paula's points there. Paula raised the sort of induction and the skills scan, and these are really key talking points at the moment, I think, for providers and employers And everywhere I go, at meetings and at events that I attend, I hear people discussing these particular issues and the new Ofsted Education Inspection Framework. And all of it's linked up, because if your induction and your initial assessment and your recognition of your apprentices' prior learning is not done well, then not only will the ESFA pick up on this, and they could pick up that actually you're spending money on an apprentice who doesn't need that delivery because they already have that those knowledge and skills. So they will claw back funding from either you as the employer provider or from your provider if you're an employer that's working with a provider. But also Ofsted, from the point of view of initial assessment, recognising prior learning, Ofsted don't want to see apprentices or any learner come to that actually carrying out learning and re-going over knowledge that they already have. And because Ofsted now spend an awful lot of time talking to apprentices and learners as part of their new inspection regime, they do get to understand exactly how the apprentice or the learner sees their learning and what they understand about their learning in terms of what they're gaining from it, what it's doing for them, the outcome for them, and the impact it's going to have on their career or their progression inside the organisation, or whatever sort of improvements in their career opportunities that they're looking for. So, as it says up there, initial assessment is basically a skills scan of your apprentice or apprentices to make sure that the apprenticeship that they're going to take out will result in new knowledge, new skills, and new behaviours for them. If you find as part of this skill scan, or your provider finds as part of the skill scan or initial assessment, that actually your learner already has quite a lot of the knowledge and skills or behaviours that are required for that apprenticeship, it may well be that they're ineligible for that particular apprenticeship. It doesn't mean that they can't learn, because what you could potentially do is talk to a provider about what the adult education budget can do for you, and if there are any other qualifications that the learner could take. For instance, if you were looking at management, it may well be that they could look at improving their management skills via a qualification rather than an apprenticeship. Again, recognising prior learning comes into that, but qualifications can have different content which might be more new and mean more new skills and new knowledge that the learner gains instead. So initial assessment or the skills scan is crucial. It should be there to make sure that the apprentice, the employer, and the provider, if you're working one, have a full understanding of exactly what they're going to learn, what the programme content will be, when they're actually going to be learning new things, because one of the things that Ofsted also look at is the sequencing of delivery, i.e., are you delivering skills and knowledge that the learner is going to use immediately? Or are you delivering skills and knowledge that they may not use for 9 months, so you'd have to potentially re-deliver it at a later date because they're not getting the opportunity to put into place and use the skills that they've learned in the classroom or as part of off the job, or even as part of on the job learning to immediate use. So sequencing is important for them as well. So initial assessment and induction gives you the opportunity to agree exactly what the programme will contain, what will be delivered when, and also make sure that your apprentice fully understands their responsibilities within this, and that there may be parts of the apprenticeship or learning programme that they're not actually going to do because they already have that knowledge. Now that knowledge is not just about, actually I'll go into this in the next slide, so let me just not skip forward, that's a really bad habit of mine. So the other thing is that as part of initial assessment and prior learning, the ESFA financial audits, they do look at this. It's one of the common issues that they are picking up as part of their financial audits. So if you are an employer provider, the next round of audits will take place in April, May of this year. And that's when the ESFA auditors will take a look at the ILR returns that providers or employer providers are making and decide from the data that they can see who might potentially be in line for a financial audit. And as it says there on the second point down on the right hand side, apprenticeship funding, levy or co-investment cannot be used to pay for or accredit any learner's existing knowledge, skills and behaviours. So if your auditor looks at what the apprentice has already done, or the fact that they've already been a manager for 5 years inside your organisation and you're putting them through a management apprenticeship, or that actually they're doing an apprenticeship where they can't use the skills they're gaining in the apprenticeship in their job because the apprenticeship doesn't fit with the job they're doing, they're going to pick up on that, and you are then at risk of having funding clawed back. Just a very quick point there on number 3 is that if where you account or your provider accounts for prior knowledge or prior learning, means that you're on programme. That's the learning, the time the apprentice spends on programme learning as part of the apprenticeship, falls at less than that 12-month minimum duration that the ESFA and government have put in place as a rule, then the apprentice is ineligible to take the apprenticeship. So you may want to look at another type of learning programme or another type of opportunity for them, because any less than 12 months and they can't take the apprenticeship. Now, if, for example, you had an apprenticeship that was 24 months long, and actually their prior learning reduced that learning programme by 12 months, so you still had 12 months to go, 12 months worth of learning to do, they can still take that apprenticeship, but 12 months is the minimum duration. So it doesn't mean if someone's got prior learning and they're on a 24 or 28 or 32 month apprenticeship, when you reduce it, that they can no longer take the apprenticeship. It's just there's got to be a minimum of 12 months learning in there. And the final point there on the right hand side, everything that you've agreed, either with your provider or with your apprentice, must be in the commitment statement and the apprenticeship agreement. That's the contract that's signed between yourself as the employer, the provider if you're working one, and the apprentice, which agrees everything that you've had conversations about during induction, initial assessment, and any prior learning assessment and skill scan. So they know exactly what they're doing. They know that they're on an apprenticeship. That's really important, because Ofsted, we've done some recent events with Ofsted, and Ofsted said they cannot think how many times they've gone into an employer to interview some apprentices that are working with a provider, and found that some of those apprentices didn't even know they're actually on an apprenticeship. Yeah. So make sure that your learner knows they're on an apprenticeship or they're on some sort of learning programme, and they can tell Ofsted what it is in case you do get an inspector coming in to interview some of your learners or some of your apprentices.
Definitely.
Oh, hang on a minute. Oh, and yes, so all of this contributes to Ofsted's 3 I's, the intent, implementation and impact. And it's an important part of what Ofsted look at. And as I said, they're also an important part of what the ESFA financial auditors look at. So what counts as prior learning? Well, there are 3 areas that you really need to take account of, or your provider needs to take account of, and you should make sure that they are, because it won't reflect well on you if your provider is delivering learning and skills that your learner or your employee already has. So first of all, let's look at this. Number 1, work experience. Any experiential learning that your employee has, if it's relevant to the apprenticeship standard or framework, has to be taken into account as part of prior learning. So is there any intra-house training that's been given that might replicate some of the content of the apprenticeship? Is there any previous qualifications that the apprentice has undertaken that are in a related subject area that might also replicate some of the content of the apprenticeship? And then finally, prior educational training, associated qualifications in a similar, in a related sector subject area, i.e. in a related occupation. You need to make sure what was the level of the previous qualification. If you were going to make a calculation, you could look at what proportion of the guided learning hours in that previous qualification were committed to the relevant learning, and then deduct that from your apprenticeship to give you some idea of what the reduction in content and duration might be as a result of prior learning. Also, the things to think about is how long ago did they gain that skills and knowledge. In some cases, we've got apprentices that might have actually taken a qualification 7, 8, 9 years ago, but they haven't used the content of that qualification since taking it. Now that means you have to have a really good conversation with just how much they understand, because as we all know, occupations move on, things change, particularly if you're thinking about something, for example, like IT. An IT qualification taken 8 to 9 years ago, particularly if it was relevant to a particular type of software package or a particular type of program or a particular type of system, is probably going to be completely outdated. So make sure that the knowledge and behaviours they've got isn't outdated, that they really do understand that their prior learning is current. Because the other thing that Ofsted also flagged at a recent event was that they have had some providers and employers be almost too rigorous about a prior learning, and they've got there and found that actually having conversations with the apprentice, their knowledge in prior learning as part of the content of that particular apprenticeship was not as good as they thought it was, and so they were beginning to drop back or fail areas of the apprenticeship because they didn't really fully understand it. So as Paula said earlier on, those 6 to 12 week updates with your apprentice to make sure that they are on target, that they are progressing in line with the learning plan and the learning program that you've put in place are really, really important, because if they're falling back, it may well be that their knowledge of the sort of skills that they've gained in previous roles or previous qualifications is not as strong as you think. And when it comes to level as well, do be aware that if the previous qualification was at a lower level than the apprenticeship, generally you're looking at what we would call progression then, and what the ESFA thinks of as progression. So they're progressing from one level to another. The only thing to keep an account of there is that some apprenticeship standards do cover more than one level. We have got some standards out there that are covering parts of level 2 and a full level 3. So it may well be that they've already got a full level 2, for example, in the particular subject area, but they don't have the level 3. So what you would do is just do a quick check of their level 2 basic knowledge, and then move them on quickly to the level 3 aspect of that particular standard. So these are some questions to ask yourself before you put any of your staff on an apprenticeship, and also to have those conversations with the provider if you are working with a provider rather than delivering as a provider yourself. Is the apprenticeship going to teach your employee new skills, new knowledge and new behaviours? Is the apprenticeship at the right level for the individual? There are some issues out there of some apprentices that have got degrees that are taking level 2 and 3 apprenticeships that both Ofsted and auditors have picked up on, which are really, as far as they're concerned, inappropriate, and they would look to claw back funding under those circumstances. So I've currently got a query out with the ESFA regarding apprenticeship being at the right level, because in the funding rules it does say that if someone has taken a degree, but they're wanting to take an apprenticeship, they can drop down to a level 4 apprenticeship as long as it's in a completely different sector subject area, i.e. it's an opportunity for them to either change career or gain a career in an area because their degree isn't resulting in the career they want, or it's not resulting in the career at all. But recently at an audit event I went to, one of the auditors said that if they found someone who'd done a degree and they were doing a level 4 apprenticeship, they would pick up on that. So I'm waiting for the ESFA to come back and clarify with that, because we know what the funding will say, but we also know what the auditors are saying. There's a bit of a clash there. So as soon as we find that out, I'll probably put it up in one of my future webinars, what the real sort of position is with that. So point number 3, are you and the apprentice 100% clear on what the outcome is, what qualification or apprenticeship they're on, and what the impact will have on the apprentice, i.e. is it going to result in them progressing or getting a salary increase or having other opportunities inside your organisation? Are you hoping that the apprenticeship will help the employee be a better manager? That's fine, as long as they haven't been a manager in a long time in your organisation. You're hoping the apprenticeship is going to mend some of their management behaviours. That's actually a performance management issue rather than an apprenticeship issue, and we've had that picked up by auditors as well. With several employers saying, well, we're hoping the apprenticeship will make them a better manager. In actual fact, what they really needed to do was performance manage that particular employee better. And are you getting value for money from your provider if you're working with a provider in terms of price negotiation and duration of the programme? So if prior learning has reduced the duration and content of your programme, you should be negotiating, or you should be having some discounts from your provider in terms of delivery, because they're not going to be working so long with your apprentice to actually finalise and get the outcome and achievement of that apprenticeship. So it should reduce the price. And also a question that we get all the time, where can I find the exemptions for maths and English in an apprenticeship? Those 2 links below give you those qualifications, maths and English, that are approved for funding, and also guidance on which maths and English qualifications are relevant inside an apprenticeship. And so off-the-job training, we're just covering this again because we still get questions about this, and I know that some employers, particularly employers that are new to the apprenticeship, are still struggling to understand how off-the-job training works and what does and doesn't count. So again, much as I said before, off-the-job training must teach new knowledge, new skills and new behaviours. And any off-the-job training must map to the standard, i.e. any off-the-job training you're doing, it must reflect what the content of that particular apprenticeship standard or apprenticeship framework is. It can't just be any old off-the-job training that counts. It's got to be directly relevant to the standard. To calculate your off-the-job training, you must deduct the national statutory holiday entitlement. Now that's actually 28 days. It doesn't matter how many days holiday the apprentice is getting. So for example, you've got an employer that actually pays more holiday, they pay 25 days, plus the 8 days bank holiday, it's still the national statutory holiday of 28 days, which is the legal holiday entitlement for everybody that must be deducted. And off-the-job training must take place during paid hours. Now, When I say paid hours, that's the normal contracted hours that would be in the apprentice's employee contract. It doesn't include periods of irregular overtime. So if, for instance, they're doing a short-term project and that's resulting in extra hours, that doesn't count. But if, for example, you've got regular overtime that occurs as part of their contracted hours, for instance, they might do one Saturday morning or Wednesday evening a week or something, that overtime should be included in the calculation. And I've got a calculation slide to go in a minute, so I'll show you how that works.
Bryony, something came up at an event I was at quite recently, and I'm just going to put it out there because it might just kind of manage that confusion. But preparation for EPA, can that be counted?
Yes, now that's a question that comes up again. Really good one, Paula, thank you.
Yeah.
Now, preparation for EPA, it depends. With endpoint assessment, people are preparing endpoint assessment quite often are actually learning new skills. So if, for example, as we said earlier on, you're using our gateway, our preparation for EPA tool or EPA prep tool, and part of the apprentice's endpoint assessment included presentation skills, but presentation skills are not included in the content of the apprenticeship.
So these are new skills.
Yes, it's a new skill, so yes, it can count. So revising skills that you've already learned doesn't count. But if you're gaining new skills as part of preparation for your time for endpoint assessment, so whether that's professional discussions, presentation skills, then that can count towards the off-the-job training. So yeah, so look at what your apprentice is doing as part of their preparation for EPA and see if they are gaining any new skills. So they might be, might be using our EPA prep tool, for example, to gain their presentation skills or gain more experience of a professional discussion. Those sort of things, if they've never done them before and their new skills, can count towards your off-the-job training. And that final, so although it says 20% of the job should cover the planned durations, that's before gateway. So the moment you've actually stopped the apprentice doing any more on-programme learning, as in you're basically just waiting for them to take endpoint assessment. So it has to be the planned duration of the apprenticeship before gateway. So if you've got a 12-month apprenticeship, it would be 365 days, 366 days, I think. Plus any time you've got in preparation for EPA. Now, calculations, you or your provider must have clear calculations for the off-the-job, and you need to keep the evidence for how you've calculated the off-the-job for every single apprentice you have, or your provider does. So generally, if you use the same approach to actually calculating your off-the-job with every single apprentice, that's what auditors look for. They look for a very clear process for assuring that you are managing your off-the-job, that it's being delivered, that it's being evidenced that it's occurring, and that your calculations are very similar for every single apprentice you've got. And if we have a look at the next slide, I'll show you, so quickly, missing slides here, left, right and centre. So these are some of the types of learning or training that can occur as part of the job that do count, because many employers out there still think that actually off the job means one day away inside a college or a provider and outside of the office. It doesn't always have to be that way. Quite a lot of the training that you as an employer might do with your apprentice may well count as off the job. So if you look at all those points there, yes, teaching of theory and lectures, that's probably going to take place inside a classroom, whether it's off-site in a college, or whether it's or a provider, or whether it's on-site in a classroom inside your own premises. Teaching a theory does mean time away from the desk, but manufacturing training, so learning new equipment or new technologies as part of their role, if that maps to the standard and you as the employer doing it, or potentially the provider is doing that, also counts. Shadowing or being mentored, simulated exercises, learning support provided by the employer or provider, so any extra sort of learning or support that you might give them. Practical training, attendance at competitions, as long as the competition is relevant to the particular apprenticeship. So something like World Skills, for example, would be very relevant. Online learning, webinars and blended learning, they can count towards off the job, but the off the job cannot all be online learning or webinars. It's got to be a mix of different types of learning. It can't all be online.
Is there a proportion where you have to demonstrate which?
No,
so
no. I mean, it has to be very relevant to the actual apprenticeship. So if, for instance, your apprenticeship is a very practically orientated apprenticeship, you'd expect to see your apprentice doing much more things like practical training or manufacturing training, or shadowing or being mentored or something, or even simulated exercises and role play. But if your apprenticeship is more geared towards sort of, you know, more research and study of actual content inside books or on computer screens, then yes, you'd expect the online learning to be a higher content if they've got to read up about something in readiness for a project, or they're researching in readiness for a project. Yeah. But it can't all be online. And yes, industry visits or visiting other companies or suppliers, that's also counts towards off the job, as does time spent by the apprentice writing assessments and assignments. So let's have a look at some of those calculations. I put two different types of calculations up here and how they work. So example one is an apprentice who's contracted to work 40 hours a week, 5 days a week. So Monday to Friday, they do 40 hours. They're doing a 1-year apprenticeship duration. So if you minus the statutory holiday time of 28 days off that full year duration, which is approximately, well, is actually 5.6 weeks, the calculation would be 46.4 weeks times their 40 hours times the 20% off the job would equal 371.2 hours off the job training that must occur as part of that particular apprenticeship. Now, example two, you've got another apprentice who works 7.5 hours, 5 days a week, so they do 37.5 hours a week, but they are paid 1 Saturday a month to work in their role. So that's an extra 7.5 hours, and they're on a 2-year apprenticeship. So your statutory holiday leave over 2 years is 56 days, that's 2 times 28. So that's 11.2 weeks that you deduct. So you've got 92.8 weeks, that's 2 years minus those 11.2 weeks, times your 37.5 hours times 20% is 696 hours. And then if you plus your 24 Saturdays that this apprentice also works each month, or 1 Saturday a month, so over 2 years, times 7.5 hours times 20% is 36 hours. So the total off the job across 2 years for that particular apprentice is 732 hours. As long as you can example those calculations of your apprentice's off the job time, and you can also show and evidence it as part of what is being delivered, then your auditor will be fine. Ofsted won't look at the actual amount of hours that you've in your calculations for off the job, but what they will do is make sure that your off the job is contributing to the outcome and the impact for the particular apprentice or learner. So they will look at what difference does the off the job training make to their knowledge, their learning, their progression inside that apprenticeship, and is the off the job training sequenced in such a way that the apprentice can then take that knowledge and skills that they've learned as part of their off the job and bring it straight back into your organisation and start using those skills and knowledge almost immediately to really bed in that knowledge well.
And I think as well, just to get back to, you know, the essence of this, you know, I know that the 20% off the job has been a thorny issue for a long time, and I think for me it's you know, it's basic common sense. The whole notion of an apprentice is, you know, is they get time to study on and off the job. And that is the premise. If there is no time to do the off-the-job training, then they shouldn't be on an apprenticeship program.
No, and I think that's something for, you know, employers and providers to have really sort of honest conversations about. Honest conversations is part of performance management. So I'm smiling to myself there, but yeah, having a really open and upfront conversation about that, because the reality is, if there isn't time, or if you're a provider and you're working with an employer or your employer, you just cannot give them time off the job, it's not the right move for them. And Ofsted and the auditors will pick up on it really quickly. And then if you're working with a provider, the provider will be penalised. And if you're an employer provider, you will be penalised either by clawback of funding, or you'll get a poor Ofsted outcome, which reputationally for you as employers is probably not really where you want to go.
Definitely, yeah. So I think it's back to me now. So oh, sorry, Bryony.
It's a bit of both of us, I think, on this one. So recording and tracking, we've had lots of questions about. It's okay, you know, we're doing the 20% off the job, but how do we provide the evidence? And the best way that we found to do this, because in City and Guilds we do run apprenticeships, and obviously we work closely with a lot of our providers and employers on their apprenticeships, is actually to get your apprentice to do a lot of the work. This is a sort of a really best practice approach to it, because the reality is, if your apprentice is tracking their off the job, then they should know they're on an apprenticeship. So if Ofsted does come in and interview them, they can say, oh yeah, I track my off the job, this is what I'm doing, I'm on an apprenticeship. That's what you really want, rather than someone who's going, oh, I didn't even know I was on an apprenticeship, I'm just doing some training. So yes, there are several ways that you can get your apprentice to track. A journal or a logbook, whether that's online or whether it's in hard copy, totally up to them. I know that there are some older apprentices out there that keep journals and logbooks in hard copy as part of their apprenticeship. Outlook or their work calendar, that's another way of tracking it. Put it into their Outlook or work calendar and make sure they've got flags so it can be picked up when it's happened. There are e-portfolio tracking systems, for example, like our Learning Assistant, which is an e-portfolio tracking system, which actually now we've inserted a 20% off the job tracking facility in Learning Assistant. So that enables your learner or the employer or the assessor that comes in from your provider, if you're working with a provider, the opportunity to log exactly when they did off the job, what it was, what they actually learned during that time, and how it contributes to the actual apprenticeship. Some providers and employers use internal staff intranet systems or Moodle platforms to track. There are other bespoke applications out there that can be accessed. All of this has to be checked and reviewed during the one-to-one performance review with the line manager and the assessor. So as you're going throughout the year, track when the off the job is happening, make sure that your apprentice is on target with the time they're spending. Keep in mind things that might go wrong, for example, like the apprentice going off ill or taking time out for holiday when they can't actually do off the job. Make sure all of that is included in the calculations and in the tracking, so that by the time your apprentice reaches gateway, they've actually achieved all of the off the job needed for that particular apprenticeship. So do monitor that during the performance reviews. But get your apprentice to do it if you can, because it's better for them to understand exactly what they're doing and understand what the off-the-job training is gaining them, and then pick up on it with them, as I say, at performance reviews. And yes, Paula, this is over to you.
So let's talk about the 3 I's. So I wanted to come back to this because it is so important, and I think it does again bring you back to the basic reasons why you're engaging with apprenticeship. So the events that we ran late last year with Chris Jones from Ofsted, who spoke, all of them actually, went through how the new education inspection framework is changing. And if you think about these 3 I's, then that's pretty much a good starting point. So, why are you doing the apprenticeship? What is the motivation behind engaging with apprentices? If it's just to spend your levy, then it's probably something that you shouldn't be engaging with. There has to be a better motivation. So what are you trying to achieve? So really dig deep on that first I around the intent.
And when Ofsted come in, they will ask you clearly. If you're an employer provider, they will ask you about what your intent is. What is the outcome for the organisation, as well as what's the outcome for the individual learner? And it could be that you're intending to upskill your entire workforce, or that you've got new projects coming up that you want your staff to be ready for. But they want to know that you have an intent there that's going to make a difference to your employees and is going to make a difference to your organisation. If they find that you are literally just, we wanted to use up our levy, if you're an employer provider and you're being offsetted, that's almost an instant failure. So don't do that.
I think as well as if you're using it to create churn. So bring on an apprentice for a year, get rid of them, and then take on another apprentice. That I think what the intent piece does is really try and eradicate all of that really poor practice that is in the system. So it's fairly basic stuff. So what is the intention? The implementation is around, you've got the idea to run an apprenticeship program. How are you going to do it? How are you going to make sure that the apprentice has a really, really good experience within your organisation? And I think that's fundamentally for me a really important aspect of it, because the amount of apprentices that leave the business, or Ofsted did say there's nothing wrong with somebody leaving the business, but just make sure that you know why they've left the business.
Why have they left the apprenticeship, or have they left the business?
Exactly. So, and another key aspect is, how do you ensure that apprenticeships is embedded across the organisation? I've been into many businesses where the apprenticeship piece is just an add-on into a very small part of the organisation. What they're looking for is how this is embedded across the organisation.
Although we say that, but I mean, in some cases there are some organisations where actually they don't need apprenticeships across the organisation. They only need them in certain parts of the organisation. But as long as it's clear why, and you're clear when you're implementing it, the reasons behind your intent, and therefore your implementation reflects what your intent is, and you are making sure that it's implemented well, and everybody inside that, either that whole organisation or a particular department, understands what's happening, and that the managers that are managing those apprentices understand how they're implementing it and what the implementation process is going to be, and that is resulting in a high quality experience for the apprentice in that department, then you'll be okay. So whole organisation is great, but in some cases it doesn't fit with all organisations.
Yeah, I think it's about the added value as well, isn't it? So how are you celebrating success? There are loads of awards out there. There's lots of platforms. There's really good stages for you to celebrate. So National Apprenticeship Service, but there's lots of other sectoral awards as well in construction and digital and all that kind of stuff. So if you do want to raise the profile internally, then really think about, well, actually, how can you raise the bar and get your apprentices recognised for their achievements? And then finally, the impact. I mean, this is the so what aspect, isn't it? So as a result of doing all of this really, really good work, what's been the impact? Has it really addressed issues around retention? Has it really addressed things like improving efficiencies within a particular function? These may be longer term criteria, but if you've got any sort of KPIs or scorecards within a particular function, has it had a direct impact on improvement? So there's lots of ways in which you can really assess the effectiveness, and fundamentally, how has this benefited the individual? Have they progressed? Have they achieved what they want to do? Have they moved further up in the organisation? So it really isn't a one-off programme where they come in for 12 months or 15 months and then they disappear. It's a long-term investment.
Yeah, and on the impact, one of the things that Ofsted also look at when they come in and talk to, if you're an employer provider, you go through Ofsted, that they will also talk to the learners about the impact it's had on them, i.e., what was the reason that they took the apprenticeship, what have they got out of it, and has it actually had an impact on their career progression or their ability to do their job better, to be more productive, whatever it is. Look, as Paula said, look for your key performance indicators for both your organisation and for the apprentice, and make sure you're tracking them and try and track the difference it's making to organisation. Because the reality is, in actual fact, if apprenticeships aren't making a difference to your organisation, if you're running a few of them, then there's probably something going wrong there, because the reality is, from what we know of data and research, running apprenticeships inside your organisation has a massive impact on things like productivity, staff morale, staff well-being, retainment of staff. So there's all sorts of really good bonuses and benefits to having really well-run apprenticeships inside your organisation that benefit you and benefit your learner, and they'll want to see what that impact is and see that you are tracking it, that it is, that there is actually an impact and it is making a difference.
Definitely. So finally then, just to finish off on the employer fit, where do employers fit? You can see there now that obviously we know that the whole apprenticeship reforms was about putting employers in the driving seat. If you look at the if you look at the inspection handbook, it makes me chuckle because Ofsted talk about this a lot. Employers are mentioned 49 times, so they are at the very heart of this new inspection framework, and I think it's really important just to consider that. The ladder that you can see on the left there, that just kind of sets out the different aspects within the apprenticeships that Ofsted deem extremely important. So when you are thinking about apprenticeships, and these are the key aspects to plan for.
So yes, so the commitment statement is the statement that the employer, the provider, if you're working with a provider, and the apprentice all sign up to. It basically states that everybody will do what they have to do as part of the apprenticeship to make sure that everybody gets the best out of it. So there's that off-the-job discussion to have with the provider if you're working with a provider at the beginning, to make sure you've got the off-the-job planned in, that the apprentice understands what it is, and that they hopefully are going to do the tracking for you and track the time they spend off the job, and that the apprentice understands how much off the job they have to do to meet the needs of the apprenticeship. There's the on the job, because a lot of on the job will actually occur with you, the employer. I mean, there are times when providers do on-the-job training, but a lot of off-the-job training takes place with employers. So how are you going to make sure the off-the-job is logged, and that your provider and you know what you're doing on off-the-job, but also that the off-the-job meets the needs of the apprenticeship programme itself and the content of the apprenticeship? and how will you manage on the job between you. So that's the sort of planning of the curriculum. So your curriculum planning is, when is it going to be delivered, that sequencing of the delivery of the apprenticeships related to your apprentice's job role and any particular projects or programs or new work they might be taking on board as part of their apprenticeship. The really important assessment and reviews, which should take place between the apprentice and their assessor, and also realistically their line manager or whoever is mentoring and coaching them as part of that apprenticeship. And I mean, one of the things that we've had comments from a lot of providers and employers about is that mentoring coaching role that so many staff are finding difficult if they suddenly find that they've got 3 or 4 apprentices underneath them as part of their team, and it's a new experience for them. Think about your own staff who are mentoring apprentices. Is there anything they need? Do they need, for example, to do a coaching training session or a mentoring qualification or a mentoring program themselves to make sure that they are ready and can handle this? Because it's really important. If you've got a really poor coach and mentor for your apprentice inside your organisation, not because they're just poor, but just because they don't know what they're doing, it can have a profound effect on the apprentice. And we've noticed with a lot of employers saying where we started in the early days with that assessment review and our on-site staff picking up apprentices, a lot of the apprentices didn't feel they were supported well, and so some of them left, and we had higher turnover than we anticipated. So our ILM part of City and Guilds has some new coaching awards and mentoring awards, which are really short programs that are between sort of 30 and 50 or 60 hours long, that can be run in a week or a couple of weeks for your own internal staff who are managing apprentices, to help them be better mentors and better coaches.
It's probably just worth mentioning as well, and this kind of takes us on to the next slide around you know, up and coming events, is that another aspect that was picked up in all of these Ofsted events that we ran was around safeguarding.
Oh, crikey,
and prevent.
yeah.
And we know from various reports around how important safeguarding is, and for line managers and employers to be really up to date with current trends around safeguarding. So we know a lot about county lines and how they're affecting particular parts of the country. Really, really important. So we will be running a session around safeguarding in the coming months for employers to really, and this is fresh content that's come in based on what we've heard is extremely important for employers to hear about, because again, when Ofsted went in and spoke to some employers, a lot of employers didn't know what safeguarding and prevent actually was about.
And if you're an employer provider, that still lies within your responsibility for any of your younger apprentices. So for those under the age of 19, if you're an employer and you're employing them and you haven't got a safeguarding and prevent duty in place, and it's not something that all your employees are aware of, and sticking to that policy and making sure they're referencing it and making sure it's in place, then yeah, Ofsted will pick up on that really, really fast. There's been something in the news recently about a particular provider that thought they had a really good safeguarding and prevent duty in place, but Ofsted have picked, I think it's a bit in dispute at the moment, but Ofsted picked up on that immediately. So we know it's a really hot common issue for Ofsted currently. And then obviously those other bits, preparation for Gateway, employers, realistically, you've got input into all of this. So the commitment statement, the off the job, the on the job, planning the program, assessment reviews, making sure your apprentice is ready for Gateway, whether you're working with a provider or whether you're delivering it yourself, you've got responsibilities in all those aspects of the particular apprenticeship. So the prep for Gateway, as we said before, making sure that you are as sure as you can be that your apprentice and employees are going to get through the final endpoint assessment and achieve their apprenticeship, because it's demoralising for them to either take a retake or to fail. And then finally, when their apprentice at the end, what's their next career move with you? Have they got opportunities because of that particular apprenticeship or course that they've done, and has it improved their outcome inside your organisation? Because that's one of the things that Ofsted look at very carefully. What difference has the apprenticeship made to your individual apprentices?
Great. So we're now on to questions, Atty.
All right. Okay. We have been going back to, I think, earlier where someone was asking, has there been any info on clawback so far?
Clawback from audit, yes, there has. Now, they don't actually advertise figures, but from conversations with a couple of auditors I know, we have heard that, yes, the last round of ESFA audits took place in the autumn last year, and there was some clawback, and there was some quite chunky clawback for a few providers and employers that had not done a particularly good job. I've heard mutterings about the amount of being, you know, £250,000, 250,000, 280,000 pounds. So where it's got really, really wrong, they will claw back quite substantial type amounts of money. They claw back obviously much less. You've heard, you know, amounts being clawed back of 10, 20, 30, 40,000. So, but it's really important, therefore, that your prior learning and those common issues that they find at audit, and prior learning and initial assessment is one of them, that you're really hot on it, because if they find that you're not doing it right across your apprenticeship cohort, what they do is they'll talk to a percentage of your apprentices, or they'll look at a percentage of your apprentices that you're, you know, if you had, say, for instance, 500 apprentices inside your organisation, I know that's a lot, but some organisations do, and they went and taught that what they normally do as an audit is they talk to approximately 10% to 15% of your cohort, and they look at their learning programmes, and they look at their evidence packs for those. If they find that across that 10 to 15% cohort they've got issues, they will dig deeper, and they dig deeper and expand that cohort. And if they find it elsewhere, what they then do is they extrapolate the percentage of flaws and errors they find across the rest of your cohort. So they can, if they're feeling really mean, extrapolate that amount across your entire cohort, and they will claw back funding for your entire cohort, not just the ones they've looked at. So
are you going to cover that in next week's webinar?
Done one on Monday.
No, the ESFA audits.
ESFA audits,
Yeah.
Yes, we'll go into a bit more detail about that.
So for all of you who don't know, actually we're running a webinar, same time, same place, 11 o'clock next Thursday, to talk about ESFA audits and functional skills. Again, two very hot topics that employers have been asking us to talk about in more details. That was a really good question, actually.
And we'll give you some details that be giving some details of that webinar, the sort of reports you can download from your ILR, ESFA systems, to check, do your own internal checks on where you are with audit, because that's really important. So
really helpful.
Also, as you'll see on the next slide, we do run a full day's workshop with best practice and whole organisational approach to prior learning and initial assessment. And in that I cover all of the ESFA reports that you can use, and how to actually embed a whole organisational approach to prior learning and initial assessment in your organisation. So we run that workshop as and when needed at request, so it's something that you need to come to us and ask for if you think it would be useful.
Yeah. Have we got another question?
Yes, there's another one here. So, right. With the need for improved digital skills, when will we see financial support to improve digital skills via the functional skills route?
Oh, good question. Not one that we have an answer to. Obviously, things have been delayed. I won't go into why. Let's just mention, you know, Brexit, new government, general election. When those things are going on, nothing comes out to any of us about policy and how it's going to develop in the timelines, because something they call purdah, when the government doesn't publish anything when they're getting ready for a general election. So a lot of things have been delayed. The next big thing to watch out for really is the budget and spending review, which is happening in March. That will give the FE and skills sector a lot of information about when the next moves are going to be made, what money is going to be available for what new policy and programs. So we would hope to hear more about digital skills next week during that particular spending review. But next week, as part of functional skills webinar, we're bringing in our functional skills lead, Corsini, who's amazing and has loads of information about this, and he may be able to give us some more information about digital skills, what the timing is, and what some of the content might be and what they're looking at, because that forms part of the functional skills specialism. So if you're interested in that, do dial in next week and ask all the questions that you might want to ask in detail.
Yeah, we'll take one more.
Yeah, just one more. So
thank you for all your questions. They're coming in thick and fast, so it shows that you've all been thinking about that in advance.
If we can't actually finish any of the questions today, we'll send them out as a Q&A sheet with the slides which are coming out. And have we recorded the webinar? So we've got slides and a recording will go out to everybody who's logged on today. So you'll get that later on.
So the last question goes, off the job training, would attendance to internal training count, e.g. inclusion training?
It depends if inclusion is part of the apprenticeship. So the thing to do is when you decide which apprenticeship you want to deliver to your staff, download not just the apprenticeship content in terms of the 2 pages which describe what the content should be, but also the assessment plan. Because if you're, the inclusion.
Yeah,
If inclusion is
Would that
part of the apprenticeship standard content, then yes, that internal training can map to the standard and therefore be counted. So it's really whether the training you are doing as an employer is included in the apprenticeship standard sort of program content. If it is, then yes, it can count. So that's another thing to have a conversation with your provider, if you're working with a provider, about the training you do as an employer and whether it can count towards the apprenticeship, whether that's off the job or on the job, because the provider, if you're working with one, will know that quite well. Or for you, if you're running your own apprenticeships, yes, check that content inside the apprenticeship standard and see what it includes.
Great.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, ladies, once again. And
thank you, everybody.
Thank you for listening. Hope you found it enjoyable, and we'll see you next week at 11 o'clock.
Yes.
Yeah, next week.
Maybe we'll put our cameras on next week. Shall we do that?
Ooh, I don't know about that. You can see us giggling here like a pair of schoolgirls.
Just a quick question someone's asking about to share the link. So we've done a lot of social, the links are on social, so if you visit Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, you will find the link for the next week's webinar. So I urge the people who are asking to have a look on our social channels, and you
or they can contact me if they want to get in touch with me.
Yeah,
and
Paula directly.
Yeah, my LinkedIn, I always put everything up on LinkedIn, so it's Bryony Kingsland. You just search me on LinkedIn and pop me a connection, and I'll connect you, and then you'll be able to see them. But also it'll be on Paula's as well, and on the City and Guilds LinkedIn pages too.
So all of that, so it's gone out on social platforms, and the slides and webinar that will be with the next day, most likely, probably as soon as we get the Q&A back.
48 hours.
Yeah, 48 hours or so, we'll get these slides and recording out to everyone. Okay,
great. Thanks, everyone.
On that note, everyone, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.